Drunken trees, caribou, polar bears, oil drilling, sea ice, wolverines, and permafrost. What do these things have in common exactly? Well, they take place up in the Arctic, that cold area up in the northern hemisphere, and they're all discussed in today's Environmental Corner episode with Alex Lee, Director of Science and Education at Protect Our Winters, or POW. Alex has been in and out of Alaska for about 17 years now, and boy, does he have some stories to tell. I'm one of your hosts, Yeti Legs, and you're listening to the Yeti Walks into Base Camp Talking Through Hiking podcast, a show for hikers, backpackers, thru-hikers, tree huggers, and anyone else who just loves to walk outside. We're a hiking podcast with a goal to make the outdoors more accessible for all of you by telling stories, sharing information, and having folks on that offer advice, gear, and peace of mind. We also like to talk about environmental topics and what's happening on our planet. Knowledge is power, and as lovers of the great outdoors, we want all of us to feel a bit more empowered. Tune in today for my chat with Alex Lee and to see what's going on up north. Trail family, tramily. Folks, how is it going today? Welcome to our Environmental Corner episode. I'm Yeti Legs, one of your hosts for the podcast. After this intro, I'm hoping this is the most that you're going to hear me talk in this episode because I have a special guest to talk to us about some really important stuff going on up in the Arctic today. I have with us Alex Lee here. Alex, usually I would ask people to introduce themselves, but what y'all don't know is I ask people who are going to be on our podcast to send a little bio over to us first. I want to read Alex's bio real quick. I'm a skier, mountaineer, pack rafter, hiker, runner, climber, and freediver in Alaska. I've been going to the Arctic for the past 17 years, have been both on research and personal human-powered expeditions there, as well as in the Alaska Range and throughout other parts of the state. I'm also a writer and environmental philosopher, associate professor at Alaska Pacific University, faculty associate with the Environmental Studies Department at CU Boulder, and he works for POW, or Protect Our Winters. Alex, thanks so much for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your stay in Alaska. If I was living there, I don't know if I would even sacrifice a half hour.
Sometimes it's tough. It is pretty sunny today, but fortunately I get lots of time to play outside.
Right on, right on. It sounds like it based on that bio. Alex, the last couple of episodes I've been doing, I have been trying to describe climate change and global warming and all these concepts, and it's gotten really heady. So I'm going to try my best, and I would ask the same of you. Let's try and keep it to a level that we can both understand, because you have a PhD. I don't, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners might not have a PhD too. So
that sounds great to me. I think that, yeah, let's do that. I think that it's actually a lot simpler than we often make it.
I think so too. First off, what the heck is POW, Protect Our Winters? Because that's how I first got in contact with you, by reaching out to POW to see if someone wanted to chat with me.
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Science and Education at Protect Our Winters. POW has been around since 2007. We were founded by professional snowboarder Jeremy Jones. And the goal of POW, roadless rule, it's actually not something POW's working on, and it's not something I've personally done a bunch of work on, but I do think it's a really important issue right now. So I'm glad you brought it up and psyched to chat about it. I believe that federally designated roadless areas are a little bit shy of about 60 million acres across the country. That's about the size of most of those square Western states. So Colorado's a little bit bigger, Wyoming's a little bit smaller, Montana's quite a bit bigger because it's a rectangle, not a square. But any of those square states out west are about 60 million acres. That's how much land has been designated roadless under the roadless rule. And that really protects it for those non-consumptive uses. And it also helps keep a lot of our ecosystems around those national forests intact. It creates these really valuable ecosystem cores. I really want to see that maintained. The roadless rule is also really popular. It has wide bipartisan support. Most people, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent, like most people tend to support the roadless rule. And then seeing the sort of widespread threat to me feels like a real rollback on something we did right. That's my hot take, I guess.
Definitely. And you're right. And I've loved seeing this. You see anyone from like a tree hugger hippie to a hardcore hunter, like completely jacked, like carrying these rifles out there. All these people and everyone in between seems to support this. So I really love seeing that. Thanks for sharing your 2 cents there. I appreciate it too.
Yeah, for sure.
And one thing to that, I guess a few things actually. Some of the reasons that it's good to keep areas without roads is because habitat fragmentation can definitely cut the available habitat for certain types of species, especially those that require larger home ranges. And studies have shown that areas without roads are less prone to fire ignitions than areas with.
Yes.
Even though there has been conversation about road access allowing firefighting capabilities, which is also true. But if you don't have a fire, you don't need to go fight it, right?
Absolutely. Most wildfires are created by people. And one thing roads do is they concentrate people along those road corridors, and they concentrate ignition sources along those road corridors. And so absolutely, there's a lot of evidence that shows where there are roads, you're actually more likely to get fires. Also, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is roads beget more roads. Roads often act like spider webs, where once there's one road into an area, that's sort of like a compromise that sets the baseline for future conversations. And it creates this ratchet. Very rarely do we remove roads from wildland, right? What's much more common is a road gets established, and even if it goes beyond its intended original use, it gets maintained as a road. And then eventually there are new, whether they're social trails or ATV trails or fully developed roads off of that. And the baseline slowly ratchets towards a more developed landscape. And so absolutely, things like habitat fragmentation become a big issue. Erosion and runoff from roads, which can be a big source of pollution in local environments. Loss of that non-consumptive resource. I mean, again, loss of that opportunity to be in this place without roads. That's something that we have a lot of access to here in Alaska, and is one of the reasons I love it here, is that it is we have a lot of intact roadless wilderness, and it's incredible. It's amazing. That's a scarcity in most of the country. So there's a lot of reasons. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why many of us feel like the roadless rule is a good piece of legislation, a good piece of policy we should keep. And like you said, yeah, backcountry hunters love the roadless rule. People going backpacking love the roadless rule. There's sort of wide political support for it.
Yeah. And I can definitely tell how passionate you are about this just by your rhetoric and the way you're speaking about it. So all helpful to hear about. But I want to talk to you about what's happening a bit further up north, because a lot of time when we talk about things happening in the United States, we talk about the contiguous United States, but we can't forget about Hawaii and Alaska and some of our territories. Up in Alaska, first off, I want to know what your PhD is in and what your thesis was even about. Was it about Arctic studies, or what was it on?
Sure. Yeah. So my PhD was in environmental ethics. It was really about the intersection of environmental science, policy, and values, and about how our environmental policy shapes the different options we have for action. Now, since then, I've done a lot more environmental science work and have moved more into looking at the Arctic. My PhD work didn't originally look at the Arctic, although I did have some case studies in Alaska, in other parts of the state, in the Alaska interior and the Alaska range. But since then, I have spent more and more time every year in the Arctic and have just fallen in love with that landscape and that place. The Brooks Range is my favorite place in the world. It's incredible. It's like nowhere else. And a lot of my writing and work and interest has just sort of gravitated towards that landscape.
Sure. Now that we've established your credibility, not that any of us doubted you at all. Circle back. You're in Alaska. You're up in and near the Arctic Circle, what is the biggest problem that you're seeing up in? It could be either Alaska, the Arctic Circle, anywhere in that part of the hemisphere. What is the biggest problem that you are seeing right now?
So what I see the biggest problem in the Arctic is that right now there are multiple threats all converging at the same time on the Alaskan Arctic. So we talk about issues piecemeal often when we look at Alaska and the Arctic. And so you might hear something about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in the news, or you might hear something about the Western Arctic in the news, or you might hear something about the Ambler Road in the news, or you might hear something about private land sales, or you might hear something about caribou decline, or you might hear something about fishery decline on the Yukon River. These are all happening in the same place at the same time all at once.
The Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, is that it?
So the pipeline is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline runs from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez and carries all the oil from the north slope of Alaska down and cuts through this whole landscape. But these sort of converging new developments at the same time as we're seeing converging unprecedented environmental change is what's really worrying to me, because any one of these is something that might be manageable or wouldn't have nearly as significant an impact. And the resilience of the Arctic is really in its size. Arctic Alaska is more than 100 million acres. It's gigantic. The population of the North Slope is just a little bit above 10,000. So and that's in an area bigger than Montana, right? It's an incredibly large landscape that has one road in it. And that means there is a lot of resilience in its scale. But what can threaten that is when we have all of these developments happening at once. So there's a push for oil and gas leasing to be opened up across two areas in the northern part of the Arctic, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. There's a push for a new road going to a mining district on the south side of the Brooks Range. There is a new oil field called the Willow Project coming online right now. There's a push for some privatization of public lands along the one road corridor that exists. And then we're also seeing, while that development's happening, impacts of climate change happening faster than anywhere else on the planet. That's all happening at once, right in the same place.
Do you think accessibility and initiative for these developments is increasing as things are warming up and the Arctic's becoming a bit more accessible?
That's a good question. And to be honest, I don't know yet. Right now, it's still not very accessible from a development point of view. Oil that comes out of the Arctic, I actually think this is one of the big reasons why many people agree we shouldn't do it, is it's generally more expensive than any oil reserve from the lower 48. So we get a lot of oil and gas right now from New Mexico, North Dakota, Texas, Wyoming. For the most part, all of that oil and gas is cheaper than getting it from the Arctic. For a number of reasons. Some of it has to do with the actual geology it's in, but a lot of it has to do with where it is. It's really hard to get there. It's really hard to get it out. And it's really hard to do the kind of development and upkeep. There are some parts of climate change that actually make it harder and more expensive. So for example, when permafrost thaws, which is one of the things that I am now very interested in and a big part of my work, when permafrost thaws, it can make it much harder to move across the land. It can make it harder to build a road. A lot of the access roads in the Arctic are ice roads in the winter. And when we have shorter winters or less certain winters, it can make it harder. But then at the same time, as the Arctic Ocean has less and less ice, we're seeing much greater accessibility there. And we're seeing much more interest in the Arctic as a region.
I see. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of talk recently about that thawing permafrost. It makes it a bit like the Scottish moors, right? Kind of inaccessible, a little boggy, if you will. And
yep.
Also, it makes things a bit more productive, right? So they're producing more GHGs, but they're also able to sequester carbon as they're becoming more active, right?
Yeah. So the role in the carbon cycle as permafrost thaws is it's releasing quite a bit of old carbon dioxide. But you're right. You get what we call shrubification. You get more and more shrubs and larger vegetation types establishing, which can absorb carbon. They absolutely do. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is we're seeing more release of that old carbon than capture of that new carbon. So on net, as we emit carbon as a species and the climate warms up, it's thawing the permafrost, which is making the permafrost emit even more carbon and thaw it even more. It's a positive feedback. And it is also doing some very interesting but damaging things to the watersheds. So we're starting to see, as permafrost thaws, the groundwater and the bedrock are interacting, whereas before there was a layer of ice that were keeping them apart. And when that happens, the same chemical reaction that happens in hard rock mining happens, and you get what's called acid rock drainage or basic rock drainage. You get heavy metals and either very high pH or very low pH come out, and it can be really damaging to the watershed.
And you also get drunken forests, right?
Yeah. And so it's and drunken forests are all, like, all of these are also natural processes. Some of them happen on their own, but we're seeing them speed up. Drunken forests typically are black spruce. And they look exactly like what they sound like. They're these spruce trees that can't quite stand up straight anymore. Black spruce grow in places with very shallow topsoil. And so as the permafrost underneath that shallow active layer thaws, it slumps in weird ways, and they all look like, like drunken people leaving the bar, tipping every which way.
They really do. Look up pictures, folks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It catches your eye for sure.
Yeah. Anyone listening to this episode is probably going to want to know about polar bears, because people really attach to large, charismatic animals in specific. What's going on with the polar bears up there?
Personally, I have a lot of good bear stories, but I have no good polar bear stories, because the polar bears are really just along the coast of the Arctic Ocean. They come inland a little bit sometimes, but they live right along the northern edge of the coastal plain. So we don't see them in the Brooks Range, for example, in the mountains. Every once in a while, you hear a story about a bear wandering south, but for the most part, we don't see them in the Brooks Range mountains. But the coastal communities along the Arctic Ocean do see them quite a bit, and they den along the coastal plain, just inland from the Arctic Ocean. And that area is the area that right now is being opened up to more oil and gas development, both in the NPRA and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the two areas that have a series of new lease sales coming online. There's going to be a total of 9 in the next 5 years, I believe, between those two areas. Those leases will both encompass polar bear denning areas. Now, environmental impact statements and other regulations will help mitigate the impact to polar bears, but development in denning areas is not good for bears. So polar bears are already under a lot of stress because of climate change, as there's less sea ice, that they have less hunting habitat. They hunt from the sea ice. If you didn't know this, polar bears are actually classified as a marine mammal, which I think is pretty fun. They spend most of their life hunting from sea ice in the water. And as there's less sea ice and less predictable sea ice, we've seen polar bear populations decline. And now we're seeing a push to develop a lot of those critical areas that provide denning habitat for polar bears.
Yeah, and the polar bears, the adults right now, you're seeing larger mass polar bears, or fatter polar bears really, but they're having issues with their survival rates of the young. Is that right?
In general, we're seeing less, lower survival rates of young bears.
Got you.
And we're seeing, I believe, larger ranges for those bears. So they're moving further in search of food.
Got you. What's going on with the caribou? You mentioned that earlier in kind of like a fragmented way, but would you expand on that a little bit?
So caribou are really one of the last great North American herds. The same way that we used to have these great herds of bison in the American West. There were 300 million bison, and we had great herds of antelope and elk and sort of everything along with it, and giant flocks of passenger pigeons. And we've seen a dwindling or a separation of many of those large historic herds. We still have large intact herds of caribou in the Arctic. And it's some of the largest land migrations in the Northern Hemisphere are those caribou. So in Arctic Alaska, there are 4 large caribou herds. All told, it's, I believe at the last count, it's around 800,000 animals total, although I'm not positive about that exact number. Um, uh, and those different herds have all responded a little bit differently to changing environmental conditions. But what we're seeing on the whole is the population has declined, and a couple areas where we've seen the greatest impact from climate change on the Arctic, we're seeing the greatest decline. So the sharpest decline in caribou right now is the Western Arctic caribou herd, which, as it sounds, is in the Western Arctic. It's in the western part of the Brooks Range. They calve out on the coastal plain and migrate into the mountains, and sometimes come south of the range and migrate down there. And it's a very dynamic herd, but we've seen it crash. There's a lot of different theories on why we've seen the crash, and there's been efforts to change things like hunting regulations. But one theory is that as we've had less sea ice in the Bering Sea and the Western Arctic Ocean, we've had actually more significant storms in that part of the Arctic, and that increased snowfall could in part be responsible, where it makes it harder for those animals to get food in the winter. Again, that's not my area. It's not. I'm not a caribou biologist. I don't study caribou. I will say that having spent a lot of time in the Arctic and some time in the Western Arctic, the first several years I did trips up there, we would see a lot of caribou all the time. And the last couple of years, I've just personally seen very few. The other caribou herd that you often hear about in the press is the porcupine caribou herd, which uses the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as its calving ground. And they migrate through parts of Canada and northeast Alaska. But their calving ground where they give birth is sort of right in the area that is going to be up for this series of lease sales in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
I'm hearing a lot of things that are happening bad, or a lot of negative things going on in the Arctic. It's really easy to fall into, and not to be morbid, but a place of despair when you start hearing all this stuff. What is something that we can do on an individual level to try and combat this and save some of the last true quote unquote wilderness that we have out there?
Oh, it's such an important question. And for me, the way I think about it is when I see these things happening, they create urgency, but not despair, right? That's why this is the time to do something. And that's why this is an important issue today. But the amazing thing about the Arctic is it is still an intact ecosystem. Again, we have 100 million acres with one major road in it. When we talk about these places as separate, not just the issues as separate, but the places as separate, we talk about a place like the Wildlife Refuge or Gates of the Arctic National Park or Kobuk Valley National Park or Noatak National Preserve. They're all connected. They're all huge in their own right, but then they're all connected. And that connected ecosystem has a tremendous amount of resilience in it. If we're willing to exercise a little bit of strategic restraint and see some of the value in keeping it whole, a few things people can do. The most important thing you can do is vote and make your voice heard. You can also always let your representatives know how you feel about these issues. They come up for vote, right? And all of our representatives in Congress have to vote up or down on many of these rule changes, legislative changes. And there's lots of opportunities for feedback and pushback. And then I also think that there are some really simple ways that we can address climate change wherever we are. It's easy to overcomplicate climate change, but if we really boil it down, we need to burn less and absorb more. That's it. And wherever we are, we can be part of burning less and absorbing more. So protecting carbon sinks wherever we are, protecting public lands wherever we are, that helps create a more resilient climate on the whole, and then helping lower our collective carbon footprint. And often we think about that as this call to sort of like renounce things or give things up. And I don't think that's the case at all. It's a collective action problem. It's something we do together. And Fortunately, right now, the cheapest new forms of energy to produce are almost always wind and solar. As a country, a lot of people don't know this. We're already past peak emissions. We're already emitting less now than we did in 2010, which is incredible. That proves that we can do that. And we have sort of incredible access to technology that can help decarbonize our economy. So it's not about giving up. It's about moving ahead in a smarter way. And fortunately, that often means we get cheaper energy, we get cleaner air, we get a healthier planet no matter where we are. And that also helps the Arctic.
Definitely. We're still kind of, I guess, experiencing effects from the GHGs released decades ago, because it does take a while for some of those chemicals to dissipate from our atmosphere. So I'm glad you pointed that out, that we are producing less. As much as some people might hate on e-vehicles and alternative energy for, those rare metals being sourced for those different types of locomotion and energy sources, they do have benefits. There's the initial cost for the metals, but in the long run, like, the offset on our carbon emissions might actually pay off.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, like, I remember in college, I was a geology major. Long story short, I remember a professor in a geology class once telling me that he said this to the whole class, and it really stuck with me, that every single thing in our lives is mined or grown. And that's something we can't escape. Every material thing in our lives is either mined or grown. And so there's no free lunch, right? And I wish that we could snap our fingers and make, electric vehicles that ran forever and didn't need any lithium. But we can't. So the question is all about how we do things as smart as possible, how we do things as responsibly as possible, how we make sure that we're not exporting the costs of our life to other people and making them pay for it, and not mucking up the environment along the way. And that like progress doesn't happen overnight, but we have a lot of paths to a healthier planet. And we don't have to know every step we're going to take down the trail to get to the finish line to know which direction to go. And so, we don't have all the answers right now, but I know that if we head down that trail, we're going to be in a better place tomorrow than we are today. And there's going to be other obstacles and forks, and we're going to have to make decisions. But we can't get there unless we start moving. And that's what we can do.
You're definitely right. I think despite seeing a push for the consumption of fossil fuels and increased timber harvest and all these things that might seem really bad, I think on the whole, humanity is realizing the problem that we have on our hands, and we're trying to fix it. We're trying to do what we can. So, I'm not going to let you get out of here without hearing your worst animal story, since you've been in and out of Alaska for at least 17 years, right?
I have a few. I've got some weird animal stories. I've got some scary animal stories.
Give me a weird and a scary.
Okay. The weirdest animal story I have is where I've seen wolverines. Where a couple times, it's happened to me twice on trips on big glaciers high up in the mountains, where we've woken up and there are tracks in truly like as remote a place in the mountains as you can imagine. And they're just walking, 30 miles up this valley glacier past our tent, up and over a pass that is difficult for us to climb up and over. And there's a wolverine out in the distance at the end of that set of tracks.
There's some hardy little fuckers, aren't they?
They are so hardy. Like I am now confident that there is nowhere they couldn't go if they really wanted to. So that's like the most sort of spacey kind of story I have. Then scary stories. I mean, like, bears just still terrify me. I now have spent a lot of time around bears and a lot of time around grizzly bears, and it doesn't matter how many times I've like turned a corner and seen a bear, they are not less scary. And I've been charged by a bear a couple of times. I had a formative experience in Denali National Park, one of the first summers before I lived in Alaska full time. I worked up here in the summers, and one of my first summers working, I was working as sort of like a naturalist guide for an education center, and we had a group, and we came around the corner, and I just heard someone shout, "Help! Help! Bear! Bear!" And like immediately, like your spirit sinks to the pit of your stomach, and you go, "Oh no, what's going on?" I was sort of at the back of this group and told a couple of folks that I was with to stay off on the side of the trail. And they knew what to do if they saw a bear. And I walked around the corner to see what was happening. And there was this curious bear, and it actually wasn't really misbehaving. You can kind of read their body language, but it was leaning out over an alder at this guy that had his backpack off, waving the bear at arm's length. And so I did everything they sort of tell you to do, where I walked up behind him, and we screamed and shouted, and then we created a little bit of space. We didn't turn and run. We looked big. We shouted, and the bear wandered off, and it was no big deal. But it wandered off up the trail into the people that I had just told to stay up there. And at that point, the bear's body language totally changed, and it turned and it looked at us, and then it turned back and it looked at them. And I don't know how high bears can count, but it can count to at least 4 or 5, because it knew the two of us were fewer than the 4 people that were up the trail. And then it turned and it charged right at us, and it didn't stop until we could literally feel its breath. And it had bad breath. And it was this sort of standoff where I picked up a stick and whacked it on the nose, and its like hackles were up, and it was clicking its jaw and showing us how big it was. And eventually it just wandered off into the woods, and everything was fine. But I didn't go outside the next day. The day after that one, I had an indoor day.
I would have sat in the bed and drank hot chocolate all day. I'm guessing you're talking about a brown bear too, right?
Yeah, and it's I mean, they're just impressive animals. I think it's really good for us to be on the land with animals that we know are bigger than us and don't really care about us. But yeah, still scary. And then we've had bears come through camp and things like that. For the most part, all the bear aware training that we've heard as people who go outside works really well, and that's actually something I've been impressed with. That if you look big and scream and shout at a bear and don't back down, they want to run away. They're more afraid of us, so that's comforting, I guess.
We watch a lot of, or I guess listen to a lot of Tooth and Claw, a really good podcast by Animal Attacks, and they're huge advocates of bear spray. So whenever we're in bear territory, we always carry one with us too.
Oh yeah, we've got bear spray swirled everywhere. That day, it was raining really hard and it was really windy, and that's like the one circumstance where bear spray, if it's really windy, it just, unless the bear's perfectly downwind, it won't work. But we use it all. Yeah, we don't use it all the time. We carry it all the time, and I've watched my wife bear spray a bear on our deck here in Anchorage. Oh. That's the only time I've seen bear spray deployed on a bear, and it was very effective.
Was it? Okay. Did she have the proper form? She was at a good distance, all that?
Oh, this was like we woke up and heard a ruckus and went downstairs, and she went downstairs first. I assumed like our dog was getting into something or something like that. And I stumbled downstairs still kind of asleep, and she had just stuck her arm out the door. And then with the rest of her inside, we have like a sliding door on the side of our house, just stuck her arm out the sliding door, sprayed, stuck the arm in and closed the door, and the bear ran off.
Wow. Maybe one day we'll be that hardcore to live in Anchorage, but
well, come on up anytime.
Would love to. Alex, this has been such a delight. Thanks for being on the show and for having such a positive attitude towards these topics that we've been talking about. It's super helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. If I could add one more positive thought, I think one thing everybody can do to protect the places we love right now is go out and enjoy them. I think that we won't protect places that we don't know as a community. And as a community, our experiences help make those places real for everybody else who can't get out there. Come on up to Alaska, go to your local national forest, local wilderness area, local trail, wherever you are. And I think the more we enjoy those places and connect with them, the more we're going to protect them.
Exactly. If you love something, you're going to want to take care of it, right?
Exactly.
Thanks again, Alex, for being on the show. I would love to have you back on and talk more about animal encounter stories.
Oh, anytime.
Oh, perfect. We should definitely plan this. Huge shout out to everyone listening to our podcast right now, especially these Environmental Corner episodes. I realize it's kind of a detour away from our normal stuff talking about hiking, But, conservation is a really important thing to discuss, especially if you're an outdoor lover like us, like yourself, I'm sure. Because without the outdoors and the conservation of it, there is not a whole lot of hiking, folks. Thanks so much also to the Fire Once Lost for our intro and our outro track. That's called Appalachian Trail. Anders has let us use that for like 2 years now, so super appreciative. I do want you to know that it doesn't matter if you're in your backyard walking a little trail that you usually do in the mornings for your dog walk, or if you're out in Alaska being threatened by grizzly bears, or on the PCT right now. At the end of the day, we're all just outside walking. Hey everyone, Yeti Legs here. We just wanted to let you know that here at Yeti Walks into Base Camp, we do not use AI for any of our editing, recording, social media, or image generation. Everything is done by hand by our team, and that's how we want it to stay. So we hope you enjoyed this episode that was hand edited by our team with talent and integrity.